Hi, Aqua Roomers. Time for chapter reading. So yesterday we started the chapter A Fire on the Hearth. And the hearth is the part that's right in front of the fireplace. So, big adventure. Outside the house, close to the log wall opposite the door, Pa cut away the grass, scraped at the ground smooth. He was getting ready to build the fireplace. Then he and Ma put the wagon box on the wheels again, and Pa hitched up Pet and Patty. The rising sun was shortening all the shadows. Hundreds of meadowlarks were rising from the prairie, singing higher and higher in the air. Their songs came down from the great clear sky, like a rain of music. All over the land, where the grasses waved and murmured under the wind, thousands of little dicky birds clung to their tiny claws on blossoming weeds and sang their thousands of little songs. Pet and Patty sniffed the wind and whinnied with joy. They arched their backs, pawed at the ground because they were eager to go. Pa was whistling while he climbed to the wagon seat and took the reins, and then he looked down at Laura, who was looking up at him, and he stopped whistling and said, "Want to go along, Laura? You and Mary?" Ma said they could. They climbed up the wheels, clinging to the spokes with their bare toes, and they sat on the high wagon seat beside Pa. Pet and Patty started with a little jump, and the wagon went jolting down the road that Pa's wagon wheels had made. They went down between the bare, reddish-yellow walls of earth, all ridged and wrinkled by forgotten rains. Then they went on across the rolling land of the creek bottoms. Masses of trees covered some of the low rounded hills, and some of them were grassy open spaces. Deer were lying in the shadows of the trees. The deer were grazing in the sunshine on the green grass. They lifted their heads and pricked their ears and stood chewing and watching the wagon with their soft, large eyes. All along the road, the wild larkspur was blossoming pink and blue and white. Birds balanced on yellow plumes of goldenrod, and butterflies were fluttering. Starry daisies lighted the shadows under the trees. Squirrels chattered on branches overhead. White-tailed rabbits hopped along the road, and snakes wriggled across when they heard the wagon was coming. Deep in the lowest valley, the creek was running in the shadow of dirt bluffs. When Laura looked up at the bluffs, she couldn't see the prairie grass at all. Trees grew up the bluffs where the earth had crumbled and where the bare dirt was so steep that trees couldn't grow on it. Bushes held on desperately with their roots. Half-naked roots were high above Laura's head. "Where are the Indian camps?" Laura asked Pa. He had seen the Indians' deserted camps here among the bluffs, but he was too busy to show them to her now. He must get the rocks to build the fireplace. "You girls can play," he said, "but don't go out of my sight, and don't go into the water. And don't play with snakes. Some of the snakes down here are poison." So Laura and Mary played by the creek while Pa dug the rocks he wanted and loaded them into the wagon. They watched long-legged water bugs skate over the grassy still pools. They ran along the bank to scare the frogs and laughed when the green-coated frogs and their white vests plopped into the water. They listened to the wood pigeons call among the trees and the brown thrush singing. They saw the little minnows swimming all together in the shallow places where the creeks ran sparkling. The minnows were thin gray shadows in the rippling water, Only now and again, one minnow flashed the sunshine from its silvery belly. There was no wind along the creek. The air was still and drowsy warm. It smelled of damp roots and mud, and it was full of the sound of rustling leaves and running water. In the muddy places where the deer tracks were thick and every footprint held the water, swarms of mosquitoes rose up with a keen, sharp buzzing. Laura and Mary slapped at the mosquitoes on their faces and necks with their hands and legs, and they wished they could go wading. They were so hot, and the water looked so cool. Laura was sure that it would do no harm just to dip one foot in. And when Pa's back was turned, she almost did it. "Laura," said Pa, and she snatched the naughty foot back. "If you girls want to go wading," Pa said, "you can do it in that shallow place. Don't go in over your ankles." Mary waited only a little while. She said the gravel hurt her feet, and she sat on a log and patiently slapped at mosquitoes. But Laura slapped, and she kept on wading. When she stepped, the gravel hurt her feet. When she stood still, the tiny minnows swarmed about her toes and nibbled them with their tiny mouths. It was a funny, squiggling feeling. Laura tried and tried to catch a minnow, but she only got the hem of her dress wet. So this is a great picture to show you. There. So you can see Laura. Oh, do you see the minnows? See the fish? That would be so much fun, and it tickles her toes. And there's Mary, sitting patiently. Oh, and do you see Pa? He has to get all those big rocks in order to build the fireplace. And he's putting them in the back of the wagon where Pet and Patty are. Ooh, that does look like fun, don't you think? I think I'd like to see minnows on my toes. Would feel good. Then the wagon was loaded. Pa called, "Come on, girls!" And they climbed into the wagon seat again and rode away from the creek. Up through the woods and hills they rode again to the high prairie, where the winds were always blowing and the grasses seemed to sing and whisper and laugh. They'd had a wonderful time in the creek, but Laura liked the high prairie best. The prairie was so wide and sweet and clean. That afternoon, Ma sat sewing in the shade of the house, and baby Carrie played on the quilt beside her, while Laura and Mary watched Pa build the fireplace. First, he mixed clay and water to a beautiful thick mud in the Mustang's water bucket. He let Laura stir the mud while he laid a row of rocks around 3 sides of the space he had cleared by the house wall. Then, with a wooden paddle, he spread the mud over the rocks. In the mud, he laid another row of rocks and plastered them over the top and down on the inside with more mud. See, they didn't have concrete like we would use today, but mud can dry pretty hard, so it should work for the fireplace. He made a box on the ground. 3 sides of the box were made of rocks and mud, and the other side was the log wall of the house. With rocks and mud and more rocks and more mud, he built the walls as high as Laura's chin. Then on the walls, close against the house, he laid a log. He plastered the log all over with mud. After that, he built up rocks and mud on top of that log. He was making the chimney now, and he made it smaller and smaller. He had to go to the creek for more rocks. Laura and Mary could not go again because Ma said the damp air might give them a fever. We'll read more about that later. Mary sat beside Ma and sewed another block of her 9-patch quilt, but Laura mixed another bucket full of mud. The next day, Pa built the chimney as high as the house wall, and then he stood and looked at it. And he ran his fingers through his hair. Oh, so I got a picture to show you of that. You ready? Yes. So do you see all of the rocks and the mud all against the wall? But the inside of that wall is cut out. So if you were in the house, you would see the inside of the chimney. Yes, that is a lot of hard work. Oh, you look like a wild man, Charles, Ma said. You're standing your hair all on end. Oh, it stands on end anyway, Caroline, Pa answered. When I was courting you, and courting means dating. When I was courting you, it never would lie down, no matter how much I slicked it with bear grease. Oh my goodness. Men used to use bear grease in their hair to make it stay down. He threw himself down on the grass and looked. I'm plumb tuckered out, lifting rocks up there. You've done well to build that chimney up so high, all by yourself, Ma said. She ran her hands through his hair and stood it up even more than ever. Why don't you make it stick and daub the rest of the way, she asked him. You'll have to look up what that is. Well, it would be easier, he admitted. I'm blamed if I don't believe I will. He jumped up. Ma said, oh, stay here in the shade and rest a while. But he shook his head. No use lazing here when there's work to be done, Caroline. The sooner I get the fireplace done, the sooner you can do your cooking inside, out of the wind. He hauled saplings from the woods, and he cut and notched them and laid them up like the walls of the house on top of the stone chimney. As he laid them, he plastered them well with mud, and that finished the chimney. Then he went into the house with his axe and saw he cut a hole in the wall. He cut away the logs that had made the fourth wall at the bottom of the chimney, and there was the fireplace. It was large enough for Laura and Mary and baby Carrie to sit in. Its bottom was the ground that Pa had cleared of grass, and its front was the space where Pa had cut away the logs. Across the top of that space was the log that Pa had plastered all over with mud. So I'm going to show you, all right? Pulled this out. So that was the picture we looked at. And that's what it's like on the outside. But if you go on the inside, so what Pa did was he just cut the log wall of the house. So you're seeing the rocks, but you're standing inside the house instead of outside the house. Yes. So we will read more tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit about stick and daub. It's very interesting. Good to learn new things. Thanks, Aqua Roomers. Until tomorrow. Bye.